The analogy I came up with is that game JENGA. A lot of people are familiar with it. It's the little wooden blocks that you stack up and you make a tower, and then the players take turns pulling out a block. Towards the end of the game, when the blocks are fewer and fewer, that's when one single block that gets pulled out can bring the whole structure down. And that's where we're at. And we don't know what that block is going to be, but we know that sooner or later it's going to be pulled by somebody, and we're going to have a massive, massive problem. The societal systems that we rely upon for our survival are becoming very fragile and very unstable.
Here at Liberty and Finance, we're licensed brokers with Miles Franklin. We are standing by the inventory, ready to make sure you get what you need, even into the wee hours of night and on weekends. Because preparedness doesn't stop. Call us 1-888-81-LIBERTY. That's 1-888-815-4237.
Welcome back to Liberty and Finance. We're delighted to have this returning guest. Richard Duarte is a well-published author on preparedness and survival over the last several decades. He joins us again this Monday, March 28th, 2022. Richard, thanks for coming back on Liberty and Finance.
Hi, Donegan. Thank you for having me here. I really appreciate it.
Your previous visit was your first, so this is a second time interview with you. And we had talked about the fact that you've written numerous articles, actually almost uncountable articles for a number of different publications that address things from weapons and defense to energy and food preparedness and all kinds of physical preparedness that people can make, as well as situational awareness and networking and all kinds of planning, redundancy. You've been through severe weather events, including just horrific hurricanes that were totally destructive of entire regions, and learned lots of lessons from that and shared many of them with us. You've recently written a new book, and I understand you've got a special offer for our viewers who can take advantage of a free e-copy of the book.
Absolutely. We have Surviving Doomsday, which is my first book that I wrote in 2012. And as an exclusive for Liberty and Finance viewers, that book is available on Amazon. The Kindle edition, the ebook, is available for free Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday of this week.
Okay, folks, so we'll mention this again at the end, but don't hesitate. Please look in the description of this video. We'll put a link where you can follow that link and you can get a free copy with no obligations, no strings attached, just a freebie for our viewers this Monday, March 28th, Tuesday the 29th, and Wednesday the 30th. So don't hesitate. Please get her done. And Richard, we wanted to follow up because we got a very warm welcome reception from your last interview here. A lot of our viewers said, this guy really knows his stuff. How soon can you get him back on? So here we are. And we want to discuss with you some of the major events that have taken place over the last 30 days and how they affect people's preparedness efforts, and some additional questions around that before we get to viewers' questions.
Yeah, and Donegan, I'm shocked. I never expected in such a short period of time. I mean, like you said, it's been 30 days and things have changed so much. Everything is moving so quickly. And I felt that it was the time to not only do a follow-up and cover some of the current events and what's going on and what the potential trigger points are, but also discuss. A lot of people have been reaching out to me and asking me if you could only do a few preps right now, what would they be? What do you see as the most important preps that people should be making as a priority? And I wanted to address those preps as well. You have lots and lots of guests on all the time. And I really admire the fact that you guys put out a tremendous amount of content, but not only a lot of it, but the quality of it is extraordinary. You have guests that really do a much better job of explaining what the problems are than I could ever do. What I really feel that I can contribute to this whole thing is, what to do about it at this time. So the way I see things, if I'm going to generalize it, the world is broken. We're sliding to a very serious tipping point. And the real pain for most people is going to start when they can't feed themselves, when gasoline and heating oil is unaffordable, when they start seeing their local banks and the bigger banks maybe closing their doors and saying, we have a bank holiday this week and you're not going to have access to your money. Also, when people can't keep a roof over their head, we're seeing that in many, many places. All of this has one thing in common. It's all going to result in massive social unrest. There's going to be violence. There's going to be people who are very scared, very desperate. Some of them are just waiting for opportunities like this just to act out, but the majority of the people are just going to be desperate. They're not going to know what to do. And as we could see from what goes on almost on a daily basis, the horror show that is the mainstream media, everything we're getting, and it's usually bad news, or even during the good times, but especially now we're seeing things that, are just horrifying. I'm 64 years old, and I have never seen a president address the American public and say, we're going to have food shortages. And not only are we going to have food shortages, but it's going to be painful. This is something that happened just a few days ago. And there's still people that call me and say, oh, well, do you think I should start preparing? Because I know you guys, you're fear mongering. You try to put fear into people's hearts so that they buy your books. And that's nothing could be further from the truth. If having the president tell you that there's going to be food shortages doesn't put fear in you, nothing that a preparedness author can tell you is going to scare you in any way.
Besides the fact, and people who didn't hear your first interview need to be reminded that you got into this not because you had this driving idea that, I'm going to sell a bunch of books. You got into this because your life was clobbered by a hurricane and you lived through it and you saw what it did to your community. And you thought after you pulled your life back together, you wanted to help other people to not have to go through what you saw your neighbors going through.
Correct. And the analogy, I came up with an analogy the last few weeks because I've been thinking of what picture can I paint? Because that's what authors do. We paint pictures in people's minds. What picture can I paint in people's minds so that they see what I'm seeing? And the analogy I came up with is that game Jenga. A lot of people are familiar with it. It's the little wooden blocks that you stack up and you make a tower, and then the players take turns pulling out a block. And the first 10 or so blocks that you pull out, nothing's going to happen because the structure is pretty stable and you can pull them out easily. At that point, it's not going to fall. But towards the end of the game, when the blocks are fewer and fewer, that's when one single block that gets pulled out can bring the whole structure down. And that's where we're at. And we don't know what that block is going to be, but we know that sooner or later it's going to be pulled by somebody, and we're going to have a massive, massive problem. The societal systems that we rely upon for our survival are becoming very fragile and very unstable. And the biggest problem that I see right now is that not that we're having one problem or another, that we're having multiple problems, and they're all layered on top of one another, and they're not localized, they're worldwide. So the triggers are everywhere. You can point at the economy, the supply chain, the potential for war, inflation, the cyber threats, which has also been mentioned by the White House over and over again, a financial collapse of the markets. It could happen. And again, all these things have one thing in common. They're all going to result in massive societal unrest.
You speak in many ways the same way that Steve St. Angelo from the SRS Rocco Report, who's visited us several times to talk about the pending, the fragility of our overly complex society, our overly dependent supply chain, dependent on distant sources of food, distant sources of energy, et cetera, and that time and time and time again throughout history, complex societies that have established that kind of a hierarchy where they've basically built this Tower of Babel to support themselves in a very concentrated way, but they're increasingly vulnerable because of the fragility of such a complex system and its long supply chains and the complexity of that, so that it eventually many, many, many points of vulnerability, any one of which could trigger a major, basically a house of cards or a Jenga collapse. One of the things that you also bring that's rather specific, though, is that focus on just practical preparedness, that steps that people can make. So can you return your discussion to what have emerged in your mind as the top three or the top few preparations that if people haven't already done them, they really must do now and not delay any further?
So we don't know what's coming next, and nobody really does. As much as people may pretend that they do and that they have a roadmap, nobody knows. So what we have to do, other than going crazy, the only other thing we can do is to try to focus on those things that we know brings a certain amount of clarity to the situation. So the goal of preparedness is not to try to guess the future, but to replace confusion and uncertainty, which we have in abundance right now, with clarity and purpose. So I started thinking about it the other day after getting a number of inquiries, and I'm thinking that the most important preps that people could make right now, and I'll take them in no particular order, but let's start with food. Right now, food is probably one of the things that's most at risk and that is going to come under pressure for a multitude of reasons. And it's probably one of the easiest things that people can address right now, right here, right now, without getting too elaborate, without spending a ton of money, without going through all kinds of steps. Stock up on rice, stock up on beans, stock up on calorie-dense foods that you can sock away and that they'll be there in case whatever happens, because we have no idea what's going to happen. So, for example, the other day I went to Costco, and even though I've stored quite a bit of food over the years, I topped it up. I topped it off. I bought a few bags of rice. I bought beans. I bought canned chicken. I bought canned sardines, tuna, salmon, all the things that you can put away and say, if something happens, I know that I'm secure, that I could feed myself, that I could feed my family and anybody else that shows up, because I'm expecting that if something happens, people are going to come and you can't turn them away. As I've said before, these are going to be your friends, your family. You have to take care of them. You have to provide for them. Even if you've told them a million times and they never did anything about it, you still have to do that. The other thing is water. Water is the one thing that if you don't have, there are very few options for you, especially in an urban environment. If you live out in the country and you have your own well and you have a lake or you have a stream or a river, you have more options. But people, and a majority of people live in urban areas, the availability of water is basically what you've stored and what you've put away. So I'm recommending that people store at least 30 days, 1 gallon per person per day, minimum, preferably 2 gallons, and then have at least 2 or 3 different methods for purifying suspect water, and all water is suspect until you purify it. And then also, if you can have a high capacity filter that you can run this water through, and keep yourself going, even if you have to go to alternate sources like a swimming pool or a river or a lake or anything, water from your hot water heater, whatever it is. And then cash. I'm advising people to have cash on hand, mostly small bills, because there may come a time when the system or the infrastructure to pay with plastic just isn't there, or won't go through for whatever reason. You'll still be able to transact certain transactions with cash, because people will still be accepting cash. Now, there'll be multiple scenarios, and there'll also be stages to this. So in the initial stages, plastic may be not, no good, but cash will be. And if things continue to slide and descend into an even worse situation, even cash may not work for you, may not get you what you need. So for those stages, I'm recommending that people also have as a backup gold and silver, because gold and silver have been money for thousands of years and will continue to be money. And you'll be hard pressed to find somebody who won't accept silver if you need something and they have it, and they're not willing to take your dollars, silver will probably do the trick. And then the last thing, which probably should have been the very first thing that I discussed if I would have taken it in levels of priority, is security and self-defense. Creating a certain level of security around yourself, what I like to refer to as multiple layers of overlapping security to protect yourself and to buy you time. And also, when push comes to shove, how will you protect yourself and your family if the situation devolves to a point where that's what you need to do? In other words, I strongly believe that there will come a time when you dial 911 and no one will show up. No one will come because no one will be there to show up. Even in the moment that we live in, I attended a preparedness talk by a police officer from the local police department who said to the group, his opening statement to the group was, "The one thing I want you to take away from this is that when you need us, we will not be there." And then everything else he spoke about was within that context. So that's even today. So go ahead. Well, even during good times, and I was going to say that even during good times, you can count on a big delay from the time that you call to the time that they show up. And they always will show up, but usually they'll show up in time to write a report. They rarely show up. And I'm not disparaging the police, and I'm not saying that they don't do a good job. They do the very best that they can with the circumstances that they're dealt and with the resources that they have. But it's up to each of us to do our part to protect ourselves, because ultimately we are the interested party. And I've been getting a lot of calls now about, Richard, what should I buy? Should I buy a gun? Should I buy a shotgun? Should I buy a handgun? Should I buy a rifle? What kind of ammunition? It's really difficult at this point to address all that. And especially when you have people that are thinking about guns and they haven't even addressed their food situation yet. So that's why I'm trying to narrow it down to some of the things that have to be done right away. In order to make it a little bit more manageable. After you address these things that we're talking about now, then you can move on and start addressing some of the other things. And by the way, I've always said this, and I continue to saying prepping is not something that you can do when all of a sudden you become apprehensive or scared about what's going on. And as a reaction to that, now you decide, well, I have to prep. No, prepping is a lifestyle. Prepping is something that you do on an ongoing basis. It's a mindset. And that's when it becomes most effective, when people do it with that mentality. When people just go out and buy a bunch of supplies, yeah, it's better to have supplies than not have them. But you also need skills. You also need knowledge. You also need how to do certain things in certain situations, because knowledge and skills will always be better than having stuff. Now, if you have the stuff and you have the knowledge and the skills, that's as good as it gets. And then a little bit of luck, of course. And relationships, not everyone that you form a relationship with during the calm times will necessarily be there for you during the tough times, but your odds of survival and thriving are much better if you have a broad and robust and resilient network of local relationships, people who have your back and you got theirs in different ways. Yes. And that's another thing. But I strongly encourage folks to go, if they don't know them already, to go and to talk to their neighbors and to meet their neighbors. I'm not saying that you should give them a tour of your house and show them all your preps and, your store of this and that or the other, whatever it may be. But find out who they are, exchange phone numbers with them. You could always do it with the, hey, by the way, just in case there's a natural disaster or bad weather, us neighbors should be able to communicate with one another. Let me exchange phone numbers with you, get to know who they are a little bit, because I can tell you that I've lived in this neighborhood here for 20 years. I don't know most of my neighbors. Most of them mind their own business. They stay inside their own house. You wave at them when you pass by, but that's about it. I have no idea who they are or what they do, or And what you're saying is crucially important, because no one can survive all by themselves. That lone wolf mentality that I have my food, I have my guns, I have my bullets, my Band-Aids, and my beans, and that's all I need, that doesn't work. And that's not going to take you very far.
We also wanted to talk with you about some of the questions that have been asked by viewers. But before we move into that, did you have any more thoughts rounding out this focus that you brought to us of the most urgent preps that people need to make right now, and why now is clearly emerging as a time when it's just not okay to delay any longer?
Well, the list is long and the time is short, and every day I'm seeing things that are more and more concerning. I don't see how people can continue to delay much further and still make any meaningful preps before something may happen. And that's something, again, we're back to JENGA. I have no idea what that something's going to be. I've seen things that I never thought I would see, and I'm seeing things that are very, very concerning, and they are threatening the very systems that we need, the societal systems that we need for our very survival. They're becoming increasingly fragile and unstable. And I hate to be cynical, but if I look at these things and I see what's being done, it almost seems like they're being done on purpose. That the things that are making these systems more fragile and more unstable, it's all being done on purpose. I mean, I hate to think that, but that's the way it appears to me, because there are so many other steps that we could be taking that are, common sense, logical, yet it doesn't seem to be happening. So I'm really concerned, and I think each of us has to take responsibility. We have to face the reality of the situation, and we have to make the necessary preps to protect ourselves and our families and make sure that we have whatever it is that we need in order to survive whatever comes our way. And again, who knows what that's going to be, because at this stage, anything could happen.
We've got some questions submitted by viewers that I think will dovetail in nicely with some of the themes that you've opened. One of them has to do with food shortages, and you've already touched on this, but if you could drill in a bit more in their specific question. Alias Jones says, there is a lot of talk about food shortages. Do you think that food riots and breakdown of the rule of law is a concern anywhere in particular, or do you mostly expect higher prices? We've already been warned about both.
Yeah, well, higher prices for sure. We're already seeing that. My concern is not so much with higher prices, although higher prices will affect not only the availability of food, but will affect people's ability to buy food. But the real problem really starts when not only is food super expensive, but the availability of it starts getting more challenging. So when people can't get what they need and there's hunger, if we look back in history, nothing forces people into violence and into unrest faster than hunger. And we're getting there little by little. We're not there yet, but we're getting to the point where there's going to be people that are going to be hungry. They're going to be afraid. They're going to be desperate, and we don't know what these people are capable of doing.
There's another question related to this idea of whether it's, and you talked about this last time, whether it's better to shelter in place versus be able to quote unquote bug out or relocate away from your current dwelling if it looks like that's going to become an area of trouble. And there can be various reasons for that, highly concentrated urban areas or weather specific events or whatever. The question from Old Man Patriot says, when you talk about being prepared to leave or shelter in place, you had to admit that most people live in urban areas and on the coast. So when something major happens and a lot of refugees start walking onto total strangers' property, do we really expect them to be welcomed with open arms is the question. In other words, is this scenario of bugging out a realistic one?
Yeah, no. And I've always said it that bugging out is the absolute last resort when there's no other options. My preferred, during a disaster, the preferred thing to do is to bug in and shelter in place. Why would you leave your supplies, your source of water, your food, your defensive positions, the people that that you love, and the security of your house in order to go to some place that's going to be uncertain. You don't know how you're going to get there. You don't know what you're going to encounter along the way. And you don't know what kind of reception you're going to get when you finally arrive wherever it is that you think you're arriving. Now, remember, things get tribal very, very quickly. So the folks that live out in the more rural areas, they're not going to put out the welcome sign. They're going to put up fences, and they're going to put up barricades, and they're going to arm themselves very, very quickly and guard those barricades, because they don't want people from the cities coming into those areas, because they don't know, in all fairness, they don't know who's coming in and with what intentions. So, bugging out is always the most dangerous thing that you could do. And people always assume, well, I'm going to bug out. I'm going to, I encourage people, get a backpack, fill it with 50 or 60 pounds of whatever. You can put bricks in there for all intents and purposes, and grab your family and try to walk a few miles and see how far you get. Water weighs 8 pounds per gallon, and you're going to need water. Food is heavy. Ammunition is heavy. And not everybody has a SEAL Team 6 in their house. They're going to have granny. They're going to have in-laws. They're going to have older people. They're going to have little kids. How much are these folks going to be able to keep up with you? Maybe you're fit. Maybe you're strong. But, how about them? And what are you going to do? Leave them along the way? The roads are going to be congested. Gas is going to be in short supply. And God forbid you have a breakdown in the middle of an interstate, or worse yet, on a back road. So, bugging out is not everything it's meant to be. In fact, it's a fantasy in many situations, but you still have to be prepared to do that. That still has to be part of the plan in case you have no other choice.
Yeah, leaving your shelter, there are some scenarios where that may be an imperative if there is some particular natural disaster or other imminent. I mean, we once returned to our neighborhood and saw all of our neighbors standing out in their front yards, and that was not normal. And we asked what's going on, and they said there's a major natural gas leak here. That a backhoe just hit a line at the other end where they're building a house in our neighborhood, and we thought, okay, this is a time we're going to not be here for several hours till that gets resolved. That leak gets stopped. That may be a specific example of a time when it makes sense to be not in a particular location for a few hours. But I know you lived through a major hurricane coming through, and that caused extensive damage locally. And depending on whether people's home elevation and the sturdiness of the home are conducive to keeping them out of a flood, for example, it may be necessary to relocate out of direct harm's way if a flood is there. But in most cases, just that idea of I'd be safer mobile than stationary is very, very tricky. It reminds me of the advice about if you're caught in a storm, go lie in a ditch. And I've even heard a comedian talk about that. It's like, that seems to be quite anti-intuitive, that it's like you say, walking down the highway with granny and a baby and thinking that that's going to be a better plan than having a shelter place to be. When a breakdown of rule of law is a concern, what kind of strategies, you mentioned having a defense plan for your home, but what other kinds of strategies do you believe, either from talking to people who've had to do it or from things you learned during a post-hurricane experience, that you think are quite practical for people to do in terms of local, home security, that sort of thing?
Yeah, I can tell you that we had looters within the first 30 minutes. The winds hadn't even died down right after Hurricane Andrew, and we had looters within 30 minutes. They were coming into the neighborhood and going into homes and trying to see if they could steal things. And at that point, that's one of those situations where good luck calling 911 and expecting anybody to respond in any meaningful way. It took over 30 days for the National Guard to arrive at our location. And by that point, everything had been looted because a lot of people had to leave. But every situation is unique. But the most important thing is to make sure that you have the supplies, the knowledge, the skills, and whatever else you feel that you need in order to protect your family and in order to defend yourselves. Again, I can't address every single situation because, the variables are all over the place, but you need to have a defensive way to protect yourself. You need to have the skills in order to make those defensive tools work for you. And you need to be able to keep a low profile because the best fight that you will ever have is the one that never happens. So if you have the defensive measures in place, if you have the skills, if you have the tools, if you have the supplies and the gear, you can keep a very low profile and stay away from everything that's going on outside your door, all the craziness, as much as possible. The only time you'll be confronted with a situation you really can't run away from is when it's right at your doorstep and there's no place else to go. And that at that point, you've got to have that plan in place to be able to protect yourself. But remember, nothing is ever 100%. So those multiple layers of overlapping security, they're not to stop people. They're to slow them down. And by slowing them down, it gives you time to think and to act and to prepare yourself so that when that final moment arrives, when those measures won't hold them back any longer, you are prepared to deal with whatever the situation is in the best way possible.
Richard, I want you to give a chance for you to repeat the free offer that you're giving to people for a e-version or a Kindle version of your book, Surviving Doomsday.
Surviving Doomsday. Yeah, so all day Monday, all day Tuesday, and Wednesday, the ebook, the Kindle version of Surviving Doomsday will be available on Amazon for free. You just have to go follow the link that's going to be in the description and check out under the e-version, the Kindle book, and it'll allow you to check out for free. We're giving the book out for free as an exclusive for Liberty and Finance viewers. And we're doing so because we want as many people as possible to be prepared, both because that's our intention, that's our goal, to get as many people prepared as possible. And then also because the more people that are prepared in your life, the easier it will be for you. So we encourage you to share this video. We encourage you to share the link with your friends and to have them go, your friends, your family, get their own version of the book and to start doing some of the things that are in there as quickly as possible, especially the things that we talked about today.
If people want to go beyond that free Kindle version of the book that they can get right now, these next 3 days, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, March 28th, 29th, 30th, if they want to find out more of your work, you appear in lots of places, not only your books, but your articles. Where can people find your writing?
I write lots and lots of articles for AmericanTop.com, RecoilOffGrid.com, and also a publication that's no longer around, but they still have their website up. And I wrote dozens of articles for them over the years, probably since 2013, which is SWATmag.com.
Very good. And Richard Duarte, author and preparedness expert, we're grateful again for your visit here with us to give us your top preparedness calls for this time and basically exhorting people to take action. And just grateful, as always, for your presence here with us on Liberty and Finance and look forward to further discussions going forward.
Thank you, Donegan.
Miles Franklin Precious Metals is one of America's oldest and most trusted bullion dealers. Miles Franklin is A+ rated and accredited by the Better Business Bureau, licensed and bonded, and has 0 complaints ever registered. Here at Liberty and Finance, we are licensed brokers with Miles Franklin. To order, simply call us, discuss your needs, and we will let you know our live inventory, prices, and availability, and lock in your order over the phone. Once your order is locked, the price is held for you regardless of market fluctuations, and the metals are reserved for you awaiting your settled payment. Within 1 business day of ordering, you will receive an email invoice detailing the order and payment instructions. Miles Franklin accepts payments by bank wire, ACH or electronic check, money order, check mailed priority mail, and cryptocurrency. The fastest forms of payment are bank wire and cryptocurrency. Upon settled payment, metals will ship out within 3 to 5 business days. You will receive tracking information via email. Domestic shipping charges are $15 for any order under 500 ounces of silver or 10 ounces of gold. For orders larger than that, domestic shipping is free. The package will be double boxed, fully insured, and labeled discreetly, with no indication of the contents inside. For your privacy, the name Miles Franklin will not even be on the package. To talk to myself, Elijah, my brother Kaiser, or my father Dunnigan, call 1-888-81-LIBERTY. That's 1-888-815-4237.